Okay, so let us carry on and talk about amnesia and maybe wrap up this chapter. Don't know. Okay, so when we're talking about amnesia, we're talking about severe memory loss, and there are different kinds of amnesia. So we have anterograde and retrograde, and I don't think I actually ask you to remember the two, what the difference is between the two, but in a discussion post below, I do ask you to consider like what would be worse. And typically when I ask a class of young people what would be worse, their response is, well, they would rather, let's see, if they had a choice, they would rather forget the past and remember the future. But when I ask older people, theirs is precisely in reverse, and that's sort of interesting. So retrograde is inability to remember the past. Antegrade is inability to form new memories. Implicit memory is like we were talking about before. So you can forget, things, but I'm sorry, that's backwards. So implicit memory are things that you know, and things that you know, and then explicit memories. Oh, fiddlesticks! I got those backwards. See how confusing they are. But the point is that sometimes you can forget things that you know what you've forgotten, and other times we forget things that we don't know that we knew or that we've forgotten. Infantile memory is a concept that there's a bit of disagreement about. So like if I were to ask you what's the first memory that you have, most people go back to sometime around 3. And the original thinking is like, why is this? And infantile amnesia was this assumption that children were incapable of forming memories before they got to around 3. But there's others, but that's not the current thinking about infantile amnesia anymore. Rather, that by the time a kid is 3, they know a lot of things, right? They probably know how to walk. Well, of course they know how to walk. They have some speech. They have some words. They recognize their mother's face. They recognize their dogs. That they have a lot of memories. But what we don't have yet, and the reason that we probably that most of us can't recall anything before the age of 3, is we don't have the ability to store episodic memory, right? And remember episodic memory of like the days of our lives. So if you were to ask somebody, can you tell me about your second birthday? Most people can't. Now, it's occasionally where somebody will say, oh yeah, I can, but then that begs the question, where did that memory come from? Perhaps you remember your second birthday because you saw pictures, right? Like I can remember things, or I have memories of things that were before the age of 3, but not because I remember being there, but because I've seen the picture, right? And remember, memories are, consider that memories are images that we hold in our head. Okay, so one theory about infantile memory is your hippocampus is not fully formed, right? That was one theory. That one has kind of been debunked. But it's more about, in the human growth and development class, we talk a little bit about this, that the sense of self, right, the sense that I am separate from you, that's not formed until till you're nearly 3 years old. The sense of the ability even to recognize your own face in the mirror is not formed until you're almost 3 years old. So we don't have episodic memories because we don't have the cognitive skills to understand about episodic memories, or to understand about the events, if you will, in our personal life. Okay, so this is a really important slide. And when I ask, there's a quiz question about the brain structures implicated in memory. This is right here. What's most important for you to remember is this is the hippocampus. The hippocampus is the memory center, right? Explicit memory, neurogenesis. This is where new brain cells are formed, which makes perfect sense, because if it's the structure that's about memories, you need new brain cells in order to store those memories. Right here next to it, right? This is the amygdala. This is your crazy lady. This is your emotional center. Notice the relationship between feelings and emotions, right? And then these are also the structures that are implicated in dreams. Your cerebral, or your cerebellum, back here. This is actually where my father had his brain tumor, in your cerebellum, right? So this is the part that remembers how to walk, how to swallow, how to breathe, right, are all back here. And then your prefrontal cortex is up here. And this is the part that's implicated in organizing memories. Some more cool pictures. A lot of memory research has been done on the Alicia, the snail. And that's because what the research with the snail is where they poke it with a water pick, and they know she only has like 20,000 neurons, right? You poke it with a water pick, you spray water, and her neurons begin to fire, right? You can actually see it. So in the brain, there are these things called memory traces. And this goes back to, don't remember if it was this class or another one, but this goes back to the idea that memories are neurons firing together over and over and over again, and they leave traces in the brain. And that's what they've used Alicia to demonstrate or to illustrate, is that what it looks like, right? Same, much like muscle memory, right? That the neurons, the fibers fire together. And then down here, and that is referred to as long-term potentiation. So going back to the second chapter, when we talked about potentiation and action potential meaning the nerves or the neurons fire, and then, right, and if they're at rest, then they have the potential to fire. When they fire together over and over and over and over again, they say that they are potentiated, and they are long-term potentiated. And the more you do something over and over, and you hear the number 7 over and over, number 7 again, the more you are likely to remember it, right? That's what we mean by long-term potentiations. And that's effectively all memory is a collection of neurons that have fired together repeatedly. This is one of my very favorite images that we see all semester long. And this is supposedly a hippocampus, and all of these little bright green cells are new brain cells. And this is supposed to be an image of neurogenesis. Neurogenesis is necessary, is necessary for memory formation, right? The birth of new brain cells. Okay. And this is the last slide. This is just an image of a healthy brain versus an Alzheimer's. The nursing students and any of the daycare, the nursing students will probably at some point in their career work alongside Alzheimer's patients. And you'll learn way more about that in your nursing stuff. But I just wanted to point out, what this is. Basically, what Alzheimer's is it's the deterioration of the neurons. And I'm not going to get into the beta proteins and all of that, but as the neurons disintegrate, as they kind of, I don't want to say, well, they do. In some cases, they actually rot and fall apart. They change the structure of the brain. And when certain proteins are floating around out there in the brain, they create tangles, and that's what this is. Other proteins, as they float around, they plaque up together, and they create something called plaques. But this is sort of, if you will, and as the plaques fall apart, or as the plaques are formed, that's the part, they are formed as the parts of the neurons that feed or send nutrients. And as the cells don't get nutrients because they have basically deconstructed and formed into these plaques, then the brain dies. And it's kind of like the brain rots away, but it's more like it falls apart. And as it falls apart, then it dies, brain death. And it happens in a sequence, right? So the first brain structures to begin to collapse are in the hippocampus. And then it moves to, let me see if I can remember this correctly, it moves from the short-term memory center, I forget which direction it goes, and then at some point it reaches the emotional center of the brain. The last part of the brain to be affected is the cerebellum and that part. And when it reaches your cerebellum and your breathing center, then the part of your brain that regulates breathing and swallowing dies, and obviously you would die as well. So that, my friend, wraps up the chapter on memory, and I'll just stop here. Thanks for listening.